The morning sun painted the Atlanta skyline in golden hues as Veronica Williams sat in her small rental car, staring up at the towering glass facade of the Sterling Grand Hotel. 23 floors of pure luxury stretched toward the sky, each window gleaming like a diamond in the early light. This wasn't just any hotel visit for her. This was the moment she had been preparing for since accepting the position as CEO of Sterling Hospitality Group 3 weeks ago. At 42, Veronica had seen more hotel lobbies than most people see in a lifetime. She started her career scrubbing floors and changing bed sheets at a budget motel when she was just 19 years old. Back then, she never imagined she would one day own the keys to a multi-million-dollar hotel empire. Life had taught her that the view from the bottom was very different from the view at the top, and she never wanted to forget that lesson. Today's visit was deliberately unplanned. Her assistant had no idea where she was. The hotel management had no clue their new boss was about to walk through their doors. Veronica had learned long ago that the best way to understand how a business really operates is to see it through the eyes of an ordinary customer. When people know the boss is coming, they put on their best performance. When they don't know, you see the truth. She glanced at herself in the rearview mirror one more time. Instead of her usual sharp business suits and designer accessories, she wore simple black slacks and a comfortable navy blue sweater. Her natural hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she carried an ordinary leather purse instead of her executive briefcase. To anyone looking at her, she would appear to be just another middle-class woman hoping to treat herself to a nice hotel stay. The decision to dress down wasn't just about blending in. Veronica understood that appearance often determined how people were treated in the hospitality industry. She had experienced it firsthand during her climb up the corporate ladder. The same person who would bow and scrape when she wore expensive clothes might barely acknowledge her existence in casual attire. Today would be the ultimate test of whether her hotels truly lived up to their promise of treating every guest with dignity and respect. As she stepped out of the car, the Atlanta heat immediately wrapped around her like a warm blanket. The valet parking attendants were busy with a steady stream of luxury vehicles. BMW sedans, Mercedes convertibles, and even a few Bentleys rolled up to the entrance. Well-dressed guests emerged from these cars with the confidence that comes from knowing they belong in such places. Veronica watched this dance of wealth and privilege for a few moments, remembering her younger self who would have felt intimidated by such displays of affluence. The Sterling Grand Hotel had been the crown jewel of the Sterling Hospitality Group long before Veronica joined the company. Built 15 years ago, it had quickly established itself as the preferred destination for celebrities, politicians, and business leaders visiting Atlanta. The architecture was breathtaking, with its blend of modern glass and classic stone elements. Fresh flowers adorned every corner, and the sound of a gentle water fountain created a peaceful atmosphere even in the heart of the busy city. Walking toward the main entrance, Veronica noticed how the doorman greeted each arriving guest. Their smiles seemed genuine, and they moved with practiced efficiency. This was a good sign. The Sterling Grand had always prided itself on service excellence, and from the outside, everything appeared to be running smoothly. But Veronica knew that first impressions could be deceiving. The real test would come once she stepped inside and interacted with the staff as an unknown guest. The massive revolving doors opened into a lobby that took her breath away, even though she had seen the photographs and company reports dozens of times. The reality was far more impressive than any picture could capture. Marble floors stretched in every direction, polished to such perfection that they reflected the ornate crystal chandeliers hanging overhead. Comfortable seating areas were arranged throughout the space, allowing guests to relax and conduct business. In elegant surroundings, fresh orchids and lily filled large vases, their sweet fragrance mixing with the subtle scent of expensive leather furniture. But it wasn't just the physical beauty that impressed Veronica. It was the energy of the place. Guests moved through the space with purpose and satisfaction. Business conversations hummed quietly in corner seating areas. A family with teenage children looked excited as they checked in for what was obviously a special occasion. Hotel staff moved efficiently between different tasks, their uniforms crisp and their posture professional. For a moment, Veronica felt a surge of pride. This was her hotel now, her responsibility, her legacy. Every guest experience, every employee interaction, every business decision would ultimately reflect on her leadership. The weight of that responsibility was both thrilling and terrifying. She had spent weeks studying reports about the Sterling Grand's performance. On paper, everything looked excellent. Customer satisfaction scores were high, revenue was strong. Employee turnover was low compared to industry standards. But Veronica had learned during her 23 years in the hospitality business that numbers don't always tell the complete story. Sometimes the most important truths are hidden in the small details that never make it into official reports. As she stood in the lobby, observing the flow of activity around her, Veronica began to notice subtleties that might escape a casual observer. The guests were overwhelmingly affluent and white. The staff members she could see were more diverse, but they seemed to occupy different roles depending on their backgrounds. This pattern wasn't necessarily intentional discrimination, but it raised questions about hiring practices and advancement, opportunities that she wanted to explore further. Her plan for today was simple. She would attempt to book a room for the night, ask about corporate rates for her fictional consulting business, and perhaps enjoy lunch in the hotel restaurant. Nothing complicated or demanding. Just the basic interactions that any potential guest might have. If the Sterling Grand truly provided excellent service to all customers, this should be a pleasant and straightforward experience. Veronica pulled out her phone and quickly turned off the location services and notifications. The last thing she needed was for someone to recognize her through social media or work-related messages. This visit needed to be completely anonymous to provide accurate results. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and walked toward the front desk. With the confidence she had developed over decades of facing challenging situations, the registration area was busy but not overcrowded. 3 staff members were helping guests, while a 4th worked on what appeared to be administrative tasks. Veronica chose to wait in line behind a businessman who was discussing conference room reservations. She used this time to observe how the staff interacted with different customers, looking for patterns in their behavior and attitude. Everything she witnessed during those few minutes of waiting seemed perfectly professional. Staff members smiled genuinely, made eye contact, and seemed genuinely interested in helping each guest. The businessman ahead of her was treated with courtesy and efficiency. A couple checking out received warm wishes for their journey home. An elderly woman asking for directions to the hotel spa was given detailed instructions and offered an escort if needed. By the time it was Veronica's turn to approach the desk, she felt cautiously optimistic. Perhaps her concerns about potential BIAS were unfounded. Perhaps the Sterling Grand really was the inclusive, welcoming establishment that its marketing materials claimed it to be. Perhaps her first surprise visit as CEO would be nothing more than a pleasant confirmation that her new company was everything she hoped it would be. She stepped forward to the marble counter with a friendly smile, ready to begin what she expected would be a routine interaction with her own employees. What happened next would change everything she thought she knew about her hotel and challenge everything she believed about how far the hospitality industry had really come in creating equal treatment for all guests. Veronica approached the polished marble reception desk with the same confidence she had carried into countless hotels over the past 2 decades. The young woman behind the counter appeared to be in her mid-20s, with perfectly styled blonde hair and makeup that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Her name tag read Jessica, and she wore the hotel's signature burgundy blazer with crisp precision. But something changed the moment Jessica looked up and saw Veronica standing there. The bright, welcoming smile that had been plastered on her face just seconds earlier seemed to flicker and dim, like a light bulb losing power. Her eyes quickly scanned Veronica from head to toe, taking in the simple clothes, the modest purse, and the rental car keys still visible in her hand. "Good morning," Veronica said pleasantly, maintaining her warm smile despite the subtle shift in atmosphere she had already detected. "I was hoping to book a room for tonight if you have availability." Jessica's fingers moved across her keyboard with mechanical precision, but her eyes never fully focused on the computer screen. Instead, she kept glancing back at Veronica with an expression that seemed to mix confusion with barely concealed annoyance. The typing sounds echoed in the sudden silence between them, each click seeming louder than it should have been. "I'm sorry," Jessica finally said, her voice taking on a tone that was polite on the surface, but carried an unmistakable chill underneath. "We're completely booked for tonight. Actually, we're booked solid for the next several weeks. It's our busy season, you know." Veronica had been in the hotel industry long enough to recognize this response. She had heard it before, in different cities and different establishments, usually when staff members made quick judgments about whether someone could afford their services. The fact that she could clearly see the computer screen from her angle, and that it was displaying several available room options, made the lie even more obvious and painful. "That's unfortunate," Veronica replied calmly, refusing to let her disappointment show. "Could you perhaps put me on a waiting list in case there are any last-minute cancellations? I'm actually interested in learning more about your corporate rates as well. I run a small consulting business and travel frequently to Atlanta." The mention of business travel should have sparked interest from any competent hotel employee. Corporate accounts were valuable, repeat customers that every hotel actively pursued. But Jessica's expression only grew more dismissive, as if Veronica had just told her an obvious lie. "Our corporate program is quite exclusive," Jessica said, her voice now carrying an edge that made several nearby guests turn their heads. "We typically work with established Fortune 500 companies and major law firms. The application process is quite extensive, and there are minimum spending requirements that are, well, quite substantial." Each word felt like a small slap across Veronica's face. She had experienced discrimination before in her career, but it had been years since someone had been so blatantly dismissive of her, based purely on appearance. The fact that this was happening in her own hotel, by her own employee, made it exponentially more painful and infuriating. Other guests in the lobby had begun to notice the interaction. An elderly couple sitting in nearby armchairs kept glancing over with obvious curiosity. A businessman waiting to check out had pulled out his phone and appeared to be recording the conversation. Two women having coffee in the seating area were whispering to each other while looking in Veronica's direction. "Perhaps I could speak with your manager," Veronica said, her voice remaining steady despite the storm of emotions building inside her chest. "I'd like to understand your policies better and see if there might be other options available." Jessica's face immediately showed irritation at this request. She clearly wanted this conversation to end and for Veronica to simply leave the hotel. But company policy required her to honor guest requests to speak with management, even when she personally disagreed with accommodating them. "I'll get the assistant manager," Jessica said with a heavy sigh that made it clear she considered this a waste of everyone's time. She picked up the phone and spoke in a voice just loud enough for Veronica to hear. "Derek, I have a situation at the front desk that needs your attention. There's a woman here asking about rooms and corporate rates, and she wants to speak with management." The way Jessica emphasized the word situation made it sound like Veronica was causing some kind of problem rather than simply making a normal guest inquiry. Within minutes, a tall man in his 30s emerged from the back office area. His expensive suit and confident stride immediately marked him as someone who was used to being in charge and having his authority respected without question. Derek Morrison's approach to the front desk was like a performance designed to intimidate. He carried himself with the kind of arrogance that comes from years of believing that appearance and attitude could solve any problem. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his tie was knotted with precision, and his shoes gleamed with fresh polish. Everything about his presentation screamed executive in a way that was meant to make others feel small by comparison. "Good morning," Derek said, his tone managing to sound both professional and condescending at the same time. "I understand you're having some difficulty understanding our booking policies." The way he phrased it immediately put the blame on Veronica, suggesting that she was the one with the problem, rather than acknowledging that she had simply made a reasonable request for accommodation. This was a classic power play, designed to put guests on the defensive and make them question their own legitimate needs and expectations. "Not at all," Veronica replied evenly. "I was simply inquiring about room availability and your corporate rate program. Your staff member indicated that you're fully booked, but I wanted to explore all possible options." Derek's eyes performed the same scanning assessment that Jessica had done earlier, taking in every detail of Veronica's appearance and clearly finding her lacking, according to his personal standards of what a Sterling Grand Hotel guest should look like. His expression suggested that he had already made up his mind about how this conversation would end. "Ma'am, I think there may be some confusion here," Derek said, his voice taking on a tone that adults typically use when explaining simple concepts to small children. "The Sterling Grand Hotel is a 5-star luxury establishment. Our average room rate is over $400 per night, and that's before taxes and fees. Our corporate partnerships are limited to major multinational corporations with significant travel budgets." He gestured broadly around the opulent lobby, as if the expensive surroundings themselves proved his point. "We cater to a very specific clientele: Fortune 500 executives, entertainment industry professionals, international dignitaries. Our services and pricing reflect that level of exclusivity." The implication was crystal clear without Derek having to state it directly. He was telling Veronica that she didn't belong in his hotel, that she couldn't afford their services, and that her presence was somehow inappropriate for their specific clientele. Every word was chosen carefully to make her feel unwelcome while maintaining a veneer of professional courtesy. "I completely understand the nature of your establishment," Veronica responded, her voice still controlled, but with a slight edge that hadn't been there before. "However, I believe there may be some misunderstanding about my ability to afford your services or my suitability as a potential guest." Derek's smile became even more condescending, if that was possible. He clearly believed he was dealing with someone who was either delusional about their financial situation or simply trying to gain access to accommodations beyond their means. In his mind, this was a simple matter of maintaining hotel standards and protecting the exclusive atmosphere that their wealthy guests expected. "I'm sure you're a lovely person," Derek continued, his tone now dripping with false sympathy. "But perhaps you'd be more comfortable at one of the other hotels in the area. There's a perfectly nice Holiday Inn just a few blocks down the street. They offer excellent value for travelers on a budget, and I'm sure they'd be happy to accommodate your needs." The lobby had grown noticeably quieter as other guests and staff members began to pay attention to the increasingly tense conversation. Several people were now openly staring, and at least 3 individuals had their phones out, apparently recording what they assumed was about to become a confrontational scene. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, Veronica stood perfectly still at the marble reception desk. The weight of Derek's dismissive words hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and she could feel the eyes of dozens of people watching her from every corner of the lobby. Some guests had stopped their conversations entirely, sensing that something significant was about to unfold. Others pretended to look at their phones while secretly recording what they assumed would be an embarrassing scene. The old Veronica The 19-year-old girl who had scrubbed floors and changed bedsheets while putting herself through college might have walked away in shame. That younger version of herself had been conditioned to accept such treatment, to believe that she somehow deserved less respect because of how she looked or where she came from. But the woman standing in this luxury hotel lobby was not that frightened teenager anymore. Veronica took a slow, deliberate breath and reached into her simple leather purse. Her fingers found the slim leather wallet that contained her business cards and corporate identification. Every movement was calm and measured, showing none of the fire that was building inside her chest. She had learned over the years that the most powerful responses often came from the quietest moments. "Derek," she said, her voice carrying a new quality that made him straighten slightly. There was something in her tone that suggested this conversation was about to take a very different direction than he had expected. "I think there's been a significant misunderstanding here today." She placed her business card on the pristine marble counter with the kind of precision that comes from years of executive-level meetings. The small rectangular piece of paper seemed insignificant next to the grand surroundings, but Derek's eyes were drawn to it immediately. As he leaned forward to read the elegant black text, his confident expression began to change in ways that would have been comical under different circumstances. "I'm Veronica Williams," she continued, her voice now carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being listened to and obeyed. "And I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Sterling Hospitality Group." The effect of these words was immediate and dramatic. Derek's face went through a series of changes that looked like someone had just told him the world was ending. First came confusion, as his brain struggled to process information that completely contradicted everything he thought he knew about the situation. Then came disbelief, as he picked up the business card with shaking fingers and read it over and over again, hoping somehow that the words would change. Jessica, the front desk clerk, had been eavesdropping on the conversation from a few feet away. When she heard Veronica's announcement, her mouth fell open so wide that she looked like a cartoon character. The color drained from her face completely, leaving her looking pale and sickly under the lobby's perfect lighting. But it was the reaction from the other people in the lobby that truly showed the magnitude of what had just happened. Conversations didn't just pause. They stopped completely, as if someone had pressed a mute button on the entire space. A businessman who had been complaining loudly about his room service suddenly became very interested in his shoes. Two women who had been whispering and pointing earlier now looked like they wanted to disappear into their chairs. "This is my hotel," Veronica continued, her voice steady but carrying an undertone that made everyone within earshot pay attention. "Every employee here works for me. Every policy and procedure in this building ultimately reflects my leadership and my values." Derek's hands were visibly trembling now as he set the business card back down on the counter. His earlier arrogance had completely evaporated, replaced by a panic that was painful to watch. He understood immediately that his career was probably over, but more than that, he was beginning to grasp the true scope of what he had just done. "Ms. Williams, I had no idea. I mean, we weren't expecting." Derek stammered, his carefully practiced executive demeanor crumbling like a house of cards in a strong wind. "If I had known who you were, if you had known who I was, you would have treated me differently?" Veronica interrupted, her question hanging in the air like a challenge. "So the issue isn't that you treated a potential guest with disrespect and discrimination. The issue is that you didn't recognize that I was someone important enough to deserve basic human dignity?" This question cut to the heart of everything that was wrong with the situation. Derek and Jessica hadn't mistreated Veronica because they were inherently evil people. They had mistreated her because they had made assumptions based on her appearance, assumptions that revealed deeply held biases about who deserved respect and who didn't. Other staff members had begun to gather at the edges of the lobby, drawn by the unusual commotion and the whispered news that was spreading through the hotel like wildfire. Housekeeping staff, maintenance workers, restaurant servers, and security guards all found reasons to be nearby, sensing that they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. "Ma'am, please, I can explain," Derek continued, his voice now desperate rather than condescending. "We deal with all sorts of people trying to get rooms they can't afford, or scammers looking to take advantage of our services. We have to be careful about who we accommodate." "Careful about who you accommodate?" Veronica repeated, her eyebrows rising slightly. "Are you suggesting that I looked like a scammer? That my appearance somehow indicated I was trying to defraud your hotel?" The questions were surgical in their precision, cutting away Derek's attempts to justify his behavior and exposing the ugly truth underneath. Every excuse he offered only made the situation worse, revealing more about his prejudices and assumptions. Jessica finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "We're so sorry, Ms. Williams. We never meant any disrespect. It was just a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Veronica turned her attention to the young woman, her gaze sharp but not unkind. "Jessica, what exactly did you misunderstand? Did you misunderstand my request for a room? Did you misunderstand my polite inquiry about corporate rates? Or did you misunderstand something about my worth as a human being based on how I was dressed?" The lobby had become so quiet that the sound of the water fountain seemed unnaturally loud. Even the background music that normally played throughout the space seemed to have stopped, though that was probably just everyone's heightened awareness of the moment. One of the guests who had been recording the interaction earlier stepped forward. Hesitantly, he was a middle-aged man in an expensive suit, and his face showed a mixture of embarrassment and admiration. "Ma'am, I recorded some of what happened here, and I just want to say that what these employees did was completely unacceptable. If you need witnesses to what occurred, I'd be happy to provide my contact information." Several other guests nodded in agreement, and a few more offered to share their recordings or provide statements about what they had witnessed. The very people who had been watching the situation unfold as entertainment were now recognizing the serious nature of what had happened and offering to help document the discrimination they had seen. Veronica looked around the lobby at all the faces staring back at her. Some showed embarrassment, others showed curiosity, and a few showed genuine concern and support. This moment wasn't just about her personal experience anymore. It had become a teaching moment for everyone present, a real-time example of how bias and discrimination played out in everyday situations. "Thank you for your offer," she said to the man who had stepped forward. "But this isn't really about punishing individuals. This is about understanding why this happened and making sure it never happens again." She turned back to Derek and Jessica, both of whom looked like they were waiting for a verdict that would determine their futures. The power in this moment was entirely hers, and everyone in the lobby understood that whatever she said next would change everything for these two employees and possibly for the entire hotel. Veronica looked at Derek and Jessica for a long moment, watching as they waited for her to decide their fate. The lobby remained unnaturally quiet, with dozens of people hanging on every word. She could feel the weight of this moment, knowing that whatever she said next would ripple through not just this hotel, but potentially the entire hospitality industry. "Derek, Jessica," she began, her voice calm but firm. "I want you to gather all the department heads and senior staff in the main conference room within the next hour. We're going to have a conversation that should have happened a long time ago." Derek nodded frantically, clearly relieved that he wasn't being fired on the spot. "Yes, ma'am, absolutely. I'll make the calls right now." "Before you do that," Veronica continued, "I want you both to think very carefully about what just happened here. Not just the part where you discovered who I was, but everything that led up to that moment. Because in 1 hour, I'm going to ask you to explain to your colleagues exactly how you treated someone you believed was just an ordinary person looking for a hotel room." The color drained from Jessica's face again. She had been hoping this would all somehow blow over, that maybe they could pretend it never happened. But Veronica was making it clear that there would be accountability, not just for her and Derek, but for everyone who worked at the hotel. As the crowd in the lobby began to slowly disperse, people pulling out their phones to make calls and send messages about what they had just witnessed, Veronica made her way to the hotel's executive offices on the second floor. She needed a few minutes to collect her thoughts and plan her approach for what was going to be one of the most important meetings of her career. The executive conference room at the Sterling Grand was designed to impress. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning view of the Atlanta skyline, and the long mahogany table could seat 20 people comfortably. Original artwork hung on the walls, and fresh flowers sat in crystal vases at both ends of the table. It was a room where million-dollar deals were negotiated and major business decisions were made. Within 45 minutes, department heads began filing into the room. The head of housekeeping, a woman named Patricia who had worked at the hotel for 12 years, looked nervous and confused. The food and beverage manager, David, kept checking his phone as if hoping for some explanation of why they had all been summoned so urgently. The head of security, Tom, stood near the door with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. One by one, they took their seats around the massive table. The head of guest services, Linda, whispered quietly to the maintenance supervisor about whether anyone knew what was going on. The marketing director, Kevin, looked like he was already preparing for damage control, though he wasn't sure what kind of damage he might need to control. Derek and Jessica were the last to enter, both looking like they were walking to their own execution. They took seats at the far end of the table, as far from where Veronica would sit as possible. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. When Veronica entered the conference room, the scattered conversations immediately stopped. She had changed from her casual clothes into a sharp business suit that left no doubt about her authority and position. But more than her appearance, it was her presence that commanded attention. She moved with the confidence of someone who had earned her position through years of hard work and experience. "Good afternoon, everyone," she began, taking her seat at the head of the table. "For those of you who haven't had the chance to meet me yet, I'm Veronica Williams, your new CEO. Had planned to visit the hotel this week under more normal circumstances, but events this morning have made that impossible." She looked around the table, making eye contact with each person. "I want to start by telling you a story. 23 years ago, I was 19 years old and desperate for a job. I walked into a small motel on the outskirts of Birmingham, Alabama, wearing the only professional clothes I owned, which weren't very professional at all. The manager took one look at me and told me they weren't hiring." Patricia, the head of housekeeping, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She had heard stories like this before, and she had a feeling she knew where this was heading. "But I was persistent," Veronica continued. "I came back every day for a week, asking if anything had opened up. Finally, the manager got so tired of seeing me that he offered me a job cleaning rooms for minimum wage. No benefits, no paid time off, and definitely no respect from the guests or other staff members." David, the food and beverage manager, found himself leaning forward, genuinely interested in the story, despite the tension in the room. "I took that job and I worked harder than anyone else in that building. I showed up early, stayed late, and treated every guest like they were the most important person in the world. Not because I was naturally gifted at hospitality, but because I understood what it felt like to be dismissed and disrespected. I never wanted to make anyone else feel the way I had felt." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "This morning, I came to this hotel dressed in casual clothes, driving a rental car, carrying a regular purse. I wanted to see How our staff treats ordinary guests, people who might not look like they belong in a five-star establishment. The room was completely silent now. Everyone understood that something significant had happened, but most of them didn't know the details. Yet, Derek and Jessica, Veronica said, turning her attention to the two employees at the far end of the table. Would you like to tell your colleagues how you handled my request for a room this morning? Derek's face had gone pale again, but he cleared his throat and began speaking in a voice barely above a whisper. Ms. Williams asked about booking a room, and we told her we were fully booked. Were we fully booked? Veronica asked. No, ma'am, Derek admitted. We had several rooms available. A few people around the table exchanged glances, beginning to understand the gravity of the situation. And when she asked about corporate rates for her consulting business, how did you respond? Jessica spoke up this time, her voice shaking. I told her our corporate program was exclusive and that she probably wouldn't qualify. Based on what information? Veronica pressed. Based on how she looked, Jessica whispered, the words barely audible. The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia, the head of housekeeping, put her hand over her mouth in shock. Tom, the security chief, shook his head slowly from side to side. Linda from guest services looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. Let me be very clear about something, Veronica said, her voice still calm but carrying unmistakable authority. This isn't just about Derek and Jessica. They're not bad people who woke up this morning planning to discriminate against someone. They made assumptions based on appearance, assumptions that all of us have been trained to make by a society that judges people's worth by how they look, what they wear, and what kind of car they drive. Kevin, the marketing director, was frantically taking notes, already thinking about how to address this situation if it became public. But here's what I learned during my 23 years in this industry, Veronica continued. The way we treat people when we think no one important is watching reveals who we really are. The guest who can't afford our most expensive suite deserves the same courtesy as the guest who books the penthouse. The person inquiring about corporate rates deserves the same respect whether they're from a Fortune 500 company or a one-person consulting firm. She stood up and walked to the windows, looking out at the city skyline. Every person who walks through our doors is someone's mother, father, son, or daughter. They all have dreams, struggles, and stories that we know nothing about. Our job isn't to judge whether they're worthy of our service. Our job is to provide excellent hospitality to every human being who gives us the privilege of serving them. When she turned back to face the room, her expression was serious, but not angry. We're going to make some changes starting today. Not because of what happened to me personally, but because what happened to me this morning probably happens to other guests every single day, and we just don't notice it. 6 months later, Veronica sat in her corner office on the 32nd floor of Sterling Hospitality Group's headquarters, looking out at the Atlanta skyline. The morning sun painted the glass buildings in shades of gold and amber, and she could see the Sterling Grand Hotel in the distance, its windows glinting like diamonds. So much had changed since that humiliating day in the lobby, changes that had rippled far beyond what anyone could have imagined. The story of what happened that morning had spread like wildfire through social media, not because Veronica had shared it, but because several guests had posted their recordings online. Within hours, hashtags like #SterlingScandal and #CEO discrimination were trending across multiple platforms. The initial reaction had been overwhelmingly negative for the hotel, with thousands of people expressing outrage and calling for boycotts. Instead of trying to cover up the incident or minimize the damage, Veronica had done something unexpected. She had embraced the spotlight and used it as an opportunity to start a conversation about bias in the hospitality industry that was long overdue. Her first move had been to personally call the guests who had witnessed the incident, thanking them for their willingness to document what happened and asking for their input on how hotels could do better. She invited them back for complimentary stays to experience the changes that were already being implemented. The transformation at the Sterling Grand had begun immediately after that conference room meeting. Derek had been terminated after a thorough investigation revealed a pattern of discriminatory behavior toward both guests and staff members. But Jessica had been given a second chance, with the understanding that she would undergo extensive training and work closely with a mentor to understand the impact of unconscious bias. The changes went far beyond individual personnel decisions. Veronica had instituted what she called mystery CEO visits at all Sterling properties, where she would arrive unannounced in casual clothes to experience the service as an ordinary guest. But she took it even further, hiring a diverse team of mystery shoppers who would visit the hotels regularly and report on their experiences. The results had been eye-opening. The mystery shopper program revealed that the incident at the Sterling Grand wasn't an isolated case. Across the chain, there were patterns of different treatment based on appearance, age, race, and perceived economic status. Some hotels were better than others, but none were perfect. Rather than being defensive about these findings, Veronica had made them public in a detailed report that she presented at the International Hotel Association's annual conference. Her presentation, titled "The Mirror We Don't Want to Look Into," had become the most watched hotel industry presentation in history. With over 2 million views online, the response from the industry had been mixed. Some competitors had criticized her for airing the hospitality sector's dirty laundry in public, but many more had reached out to ask for help implementing similar programs at their own properties. 3 major hotel chains had hired Sterling Hospitality Group as consultants to help them address bias in their customer service training. Back at the Sterling Grand, the changes were visible everywhere. The staff training program had been completely redesigned, with modules on unconscious bias, cultural sensitivity, and inclusive service. But more importantly, the hiring and promotion practices had been overhauled to ensure that leadership positions reflected the diversity of the communities they served. Patricia, the head of housekeeping who had been at the hotel for 12 years, had been promoted to assistant general manager. Her deep understanding of the hotel's operations, combined with her natural empathy for both guests and staff, made her perfect for the role. Under her leadership, employee satisfaction scores had reached all-time highs. Jessica, the front desk clerk who had initially dismissed Veronica, had become one of the hotel's most effective advocates for inclusive service. Her personal experience with making biased assumptions had given her unique insight into how easily discrimination could happen, even among well-meaning people. She now led training sessions for new employees, sharing her own story as a cautionary tale and teaching others to recognize their own unconscious biases. The hotel's guest satisfaction scores had initially dipped as the story gained national attention, but within 3 months, they had rebounded to higher levels than ever before. Reviews consistently praised the staff's genuine warmth and the sense that every guest was truly welcomed and valued, regardless of their background or appearance. But perhaps the most significant change was in the hotel's clientele. The Sterling Grand had always attracted wealthy guests, but now it was also drawing travelers who had previously felt excluded from luxury hospitality. Families celebrating special occasions, small business owners treating themselves to a nice hotel stay, and travelers from diverse backgrounds all felt comfortable and welcome. One evening, about 4 months after the incident, Veronica had been having dinner in the hotel's restaurant when she overheard a conversation at the next table. An older African-American woman was telling her daughter about how nervous she had been to book a room at such an expensive hotel, but how amazed she was by the treatment she had received. "I felt like royalty from the moment I walked in," the woman had said. Not because I was wearing expensive clothes or driving a fancy car, but because they treated me like I mattered as a human being. That conversation had brought tears to Veronica's eyes, because it represented exactly what she had been trying to achieve. It wasn't about lowering standards or changing the luxury nature of the hotel. It was about expanding the definition of who deserved to experience excellence in hospitality. The ripple effects had extended far beyond the hotel industry. Veronica had been invited to speak at business schools, diversity conferences, and leadership seminars across the country. Her story had become a case study in how leaders could turn moments of crisis into opportunities for positive change. She had also established the Sterling Foundation, using a portion of the company's profits to provide scholarships and mentorship programs for young people from underrepresented communities who wanted to enter the hospitality industry. The foundation's first class of scholarship recipients had just started their programs at hotel management schools across the country. The foundation's flagship program was called Second Chances, which provided job training and placement assistance for people who had been excluded from traditional employment opportunities. Former inmates, people experiencing homelessness, and individuals with gaps in their employment history were given comprehensive training and support to build careers in hospitality. Derek, the assistant manager who had been fired, had actually applied to the Second Chances program 6 months later. His termination had been a wake-up call that forced him to confront his own biases and assumptions. He had spent months in therapy and volunteering at homeless shelters, working to understand how his privileged background had shaped his worldview. Veronica had personally interviewed him for the program, not because she was required to, but because she believed in the power of redemption and growth. Derek was now working at a Sterling property in another city, starting from an entry-level position and slowly earning back the trust and respect of his colleagues. The most surprising development had been the impact on Sterling hospitality group's financial performance. Despite initial concerns about boycotts and negative publicity, the company had experienced its most profitable year in history. The authenticity of their commitment to change had resonated with consumers, and bookings had increased significantly across all properties. Industry analysts attributed the success to several factors: the genuine nature of the changes, the positive media coverage that followed the initial crisis, and the growing consumer preference for companies that demonstrated real social responsibility rather than just talking about it. As Veronica sat in her office that morning, reflecting on the journey from that humiliating day to this moment of quiet satisfaction, she realized that the incident at the Sterling Grand had been a gift in disguise. It had forced her company to confront uncomfortable truths and make difficult changes. But those changes had ultimately made them stronger, more successful, and more aligned with their stated values. Her assistant knocked on the door, reminding her of the morning's board meeting, where she would present the quarterly results and discuss plans for expanding the mystery shopper program to include other types of bias beyond racial discrimination. But first, she had one more stop to make. She was driving to the Sterling Grand Hotel, dressed in casual clothes and carrying a simple purse, to conduct another surprise visit and see how far they had truly come.